أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن عليا ولي الله أشهد أن عليا أمير المؤمنين وأبناءه المعصومين حجج الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح حي على خير العمل حي على خير العمل الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله لا إله إلا الله وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله وسلم.
أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. I seek refuge in God, the all-hearing, the all-knowing, from the accursed Satan. In the name of God, the most merciful, the most compassionate. All praise is due to God, the first before creation and life, and last after the annihilation of all things. He is the all-knowing, who does not forget those who remember him, does not diminish the reward of those who thank him, does not disappoint those who call upon him, and does not sever the hope of those who place their trust in him. I bear witness that there is no deity but God, alone without a partner, and I bear witness that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wa alihi is his servant and messenger. He sent him with guidance and the religion of truth to make it prevail over all religions, even though the polytheists may dislike it. O God, send your blessings upon Muhammad and the family of Muhammad, and bless Muhammad and the family of Muhammad, and have mercy upon Muhammad and the family of Muhammad in the best way that you have sent blessings, bestowed blessings, and shown mercy upon Ibrahim and the family of Ibrahim alayhi salam. Indeed, you are the praiseworthy, the glorious, and you do what you will. Servants of God, I advise you and myself to be mindful of God, the Almighty, to follow his commands and to avoid his prohibitions. On this Friday, I'd like to mention a few things that are related to the sacredness of this day, as I have last week in a general sense, but I want to go into more specifics during this week. If we look at the behavior of the Imams alayhimus salam, the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam and his teachings, we see that they tried to maintain the perfection of the human being on multiple levels. It wasn't only one facet of the human that was addressed by them. Because in reality, what we are as humans is we are individuals, right? Each individual has their own journey towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You have your own life, you have your own soul, you have your own being. But at the same time, you're part of a collectivity as well. And a religion such as Islam that claimed to come to all of mankind and it came as the final message of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we have to assume that it came as a collective message, a comprehensive message. It didn't come only to deal with a specific type of problem related to a specific time in history of humanity. This is a difference between a revelation that is possibly not claiming that it's the final revelation. So let's say it was a revelation that came before Islam. It didn't have this claim that this is the final message of God. It's okay to assume that this religion didn't come as a comprehensive religion because it was perhaps dealing with a specific issue that was prevalent at that period of time. Keeping in mind that there's going to be another revelation that's going to come and perfect it or amend or fulfill whatever is missing. So if a message doesn't claim that it's the final message, then we don't assume that it's trying to deal with every single human problem. It might be a temporary issue. And that's taken, whatever is taken into consideration when it comes to that message is that there's going to be another one that's going to come and amend that or fill whatever is empty. When it comes to Islam, the claim is that it's the final message, that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wa is the final messenger. So when we have this in our mind, and we see that the religion itself claims this, we have to understand that it has to be a religion that is more collective or more comprehensive in its nature. It doesn't only deal with one facet of the human being. So if we look at Islam, we come to examine it. Does it fulfill this criteria or no? And looking at the laws that were revealed and the teachings that were given by the Prophet, we see that every single aspect of the human society and the human being were addressed. So we have aspects that deal with the individual on an individual level. We have laws that concern the human being in their own life. So your prayers, your fasting, your getting close to Allah, your relationship with God. These things concern your personal relationship with God. They're governed, they're managed on the spiritual level and on the worldly level. Laws that concern the dunya and laws that concern the akhirah. Next, we kind of expand the circle. The relationship between the individual and the other. We have the immediate other, which is your family, your immediate family, and then we expand the circle as we go along. We see that there are laws that were revealed that govern the relationship between the human being, the individual, and his or her immediate family. Islamic laws related to the dunyawi aspect, the worldly aspect, and those related to the spiritual aspect as well. We expand the circle a bit more. Now we have this community that you live in. Islam has also addressed this issue. How do I deal with people who are within my own collectivity? There are laws concerning that. There are ethics that we have to follow, certain criteria that the Prophet and the Imams has placed for us in order to manage and govern these relationships. And if we expand even more, then we have the society until we reach all of humanity. And then we have teachings and laws that are related to dealing with all of existence. So you have animals, you have nature, you have trees, you have land, things that are not even animate objects. So Islam has come to fulfill all of these roles. And it came to teach us that your relationship isn't only with yourself. So an egocentric approach to life is not what Islam teaches. It teaches one that there is caring for the self, but there also has to be care for the other as well. And it also teaches us that this other is not only a human being, but everything in this creation is from God. I am responsible towards everything. A lot of times when we, live as individuals in our communities, we feel that the only thing that we should be concerned with is our relationship with our family members or our community. And we hardly deal with people who are outside of it. We kind of create a bubble for ourselves. And we say, okay, we are Muslims, and this is the only circle we're going to be in. And we kind of disconnect from the people outside of that circle. Now, this is kind of natural, that human beings tend to gather amongst each other if they have some familiar concept or idea that they share between each other, right? And we tend to distance ourselves from the people that we don't have a lot of familiar things with. And what the social media apps have done is they've taken this into consideration too, like their algorithms. If you search a certain thing, then everything that's going to show up is going to be related to that. It kind of begins to develop algorithms based on what you search, how you think, and then it puts you in a bubble as well, because it makes you feel comfortable, it makes you feel safe, it makes you feel like powerful. So each and every one of us now have our real bubble that we live in the outside world, and now we also have that bubble that we live in the virtual world. So we're never exposed to these other opinions. And if you're not exposed to that opinion, you become more radical in your own opinions. You become more firm in what you believe in, and you reject the other very severely and very harshly. What Islam wanted to do, it wanted to maintain close ties between the Muslims, but it also wanted the Muslims to be connected to people who are outside of the fold of Islam. At the end of the day, these individuals are creatures that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created. They are human beings. They came from Allah. They didn't come from another God or from some other being. They came from God as well. Not everybody has to be a Muslim for you to respect them. And within the fold of Islam, not everybody has to be on your own madhab, your own sect, for you to respect them as well. If we look at the hadith of the Imams, alayhum salam, because they were asked about this on many occasions. During their times, they began, the Shias, the followers of the Imams, and in the Sunni school of thought, the followers of the other madhahib, the sects in fiqh, they began developing these closed circles. Theology was beginning to develop at that time. Argumentation, beliefs were beginning to set. The Ash'aris are an individual of a group of people who have a set of beliefs in theology. They became the Ash'aris. Opposed to them are the Mu'tazilis. And then you had everybody either belonging to this or belonging to that, and sects were beginning to develop. Now the Imams were approached, and they had followers who were very, very radical in their approach to life. So there was one individual named Zurara. He would refuse to marry a woman. He didn't want to get a wife because there was a possibility that this wife might change her mind about her beliefs during the marriage. This is how strict he was in his thought. He was very radical in that sense. He didn't want to risk being with someone that might change in their life. And he's already categorized the other in such a way where if she doesn't share his belief system, then he cannot even live with her in one house. So the Imam tried to amend that. He had a lot of discussions with Zurara, and Zurara was adamant about this idea. He didn't want to change his opinion. And he kept bringing verses from the Quran, trying to prove to the Imam that if the other individual doesn't believe in what I believe in, then they're going to hellfire. Because this was the predominant view at that time. You're either a mu'min, you're a believer, or you're a kafir. These are the categories that the Quran had mentioned, according to Zurara. And this was the argumentation of that group of people. And a lot of Muslims believe this, that there's no middle ground between iman, belief, and kufr, which is disbelief. So the Imam argues against this to Zurara. He tells him, no, we actually have other categories that make a person not a believer and not a disbeliever. So Zurara insists that no, there isn't any. It's not possible. He argues with the Imam. He tells him, well, isn't there only hell or heaven? He's trying to argue from a different perspective. If there's only hell and heaven, where's this third place? Where are these other non-believers or believers? Where are they going to fit? If you're a believer, you go to heaven. If you're a non-believer, you go to hell. This other category that you're telling me about looks like they have no place in the hereafter. They don't belong anywhere, right? So the Imam brings Quranic evidence to show that in addition to these two categories, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about other individuals, such as Ashab al-A'raf, for example. And they were people who, and another group was خَلَطُ عَمَلًا صَالِحًا وَآخَرَ سَيِّئًا, people who have mixed good deeds and bad deeds. These are neither believers nor disbelievers in that sense of reward and punishment. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran says that He will deal with them after death. Another category, which was the main category that the Imam was trying to argue for, is the mustad'afin, those who are, let's say, weakened, or they're weak. Weak in their intellect, meaning that they have not received the truth, or they have not received it in the right way for them to follow it. So let's say that the Prophet ﷺ was in Mecca, right? And we had people during his lifetime that were living in South America. They didn't receive Islam. That message was not sent to them. So the Prophet was alive. The message of Islam was there. What do we do with these individuals? Do we treat them as believers or non-believers? Considering that the Prophet was alive at that time, but they did not receive the message. So this would be a mustada'af. They didn't get the message of Islam. All right. Is it enough for us to say that after the Prophet came and the message was revealed and it became accessible, that everyone is now accountable on the same level and same degree? And the Imams say, no, it's not. Some people, the deficiency doesn't come from the message not being there. Some people are incapable of understanding the message properly, if being told about the message from a non-infallible individual. So when the Prophet speaks to someone, the Prophet is very well aware of how to use language and arguments with that individual, because they're the masters of humanity. They know what this person needs. A person who is a philosopher, you don't talk to him about Islam the same way you would talk to a shepherd. You have to use a different argument. You have to use a different language, a different mentality. You don't talk to everybody in the same way. So I, for example, might consider myself a messenger of Islam now, after the Prophet had passed, right? We carry the message, we're Muslims. We go out and people want to call people to Islam, or they want to argue that Islam is the true religion. But the arguments that I use are terrible arguments. Arguments that don't convince people if used, right? There's a lot of people that do that. They go out there and say, okay, this is Islam, I'm going to claim this, and if they don't listen, they're kuffar. It's because their hearts are blind. But it's very possible that the arguments that I'm using are incorrect. They don't fit with the mentality of that individual. They're not at the level of comprehension of that individual. Or my arguments are lower than what that person is able to think. He might be a more intelligent individual than I am. So just because I argue for Islam and that person rejects it, doesn't make that individual a disbeliever in that sense. They could be of the mustada'afin. Why? Because they didn't receive the message in the correct way with the correct arguments for them to accept it. So, and this is the majority of humankind. Not everybody has the correct access to Islam and Islamic teachings. Not only that, but because the Prophet had departed from this world, and the Imams had also departed, and as we, the Shia, believe, Imam Mahdi alayhi salam went into occultation because of what the humans had done at that time. They prevented this guidance from reaching us. Then we don't have access to the perfect version of Islam. We have access to a very good version of it. We have a lot of teachings that have been passed down. The general understanding of Islam is there. The general rulings are there. But we don't have access to the exact teachings. So there is a possibility that there's a deficiency in that area. So we shouldn't expect individuals that are outside of our fold to completely be convinced of this idea. Yes, people who are good, their hearts are pure, and they have this attraction to God and want to learn about Him, there's a higher chance that they will be attracted to Islam than other people who are not interested in this at all. So keeping this in mind, we have to understand that our relationship with the other has to be on this basis. It has to be less judgmental during these days. This is about the non-Muslim. Imagine how it is when you're dealing with the Muslims as well. You have to be even more forgiving in this sense, even more careful about judging other people. Within the same madhab, the same sect, if you're a Shi'i, the Imam tells Zurara that the Shias, there are some people who are on a higher level of spirituality. They have a higher level of comprehension. They understand and they're closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala more. This is a certain group of people. Don't hold everybody accountable to the same level as you hold these individuals. Don't expect everyone outside of your fold to understand what you're talking about. A lot of people online now talk about like the merits of the Imams and the high spiritual stations of the Imams. And whoever doesn't accept this idea, they consider them to be non-followers of the Imams. They're muqassira. They give them names, right? The thing is, not everybody is on the same level as you are. Maybe you've delved into the hadiths, maybe you've developed yourself spiritually, you're able to comprehend spiritual realities and truths. Not everybody can do this. So don't judge everybody based on the criteria that you have. You expand the circle, now there are people who just follow the imam. They believe that they are their leaders, but they're not spiritually connected to them. They don't comprehend the levels and ranks of spirituality, but they have love for Ahlul Bayt, and they follow their laws. This is a bigger, you have to maintain a good relationship with these individuals. Then you have a bigger circle. You have Muslims who love Ahlul Bayt, but don't follow the rulings that come from them. From the Sunnah, for example. They're lovers of Ahlul Bayt. They love Imam Ali, the family of the Prophet, because they obey the Prophet's command about loving them. You have to maintain a certain type of respect with them as well, a certain type of connection with them. And then you have a big circle of some Muslims who were never taught to love Ahlul Bayt. A lot of Muslims that learned to love Ahlul Bayt, that were Sunni, in certain countries, they would come out and say that a lot of our youth on the minbar, they never told us about this stuff. There are individuals who intentionally try to keep Ahlul Bayt away from the people. When they come to know about them, and they know how much the Prophet commanded us to love them and follow them, they develop an affection towards them. So these individuals, you also have responsibilities towards them. And if you expand the circle, then you have the general Muslim. And the general Muslims who don't even share any of this with us. The Imam tells them that, well, they share Islam with you. They don't share Iman, which is a deeper level of Islam, but they share Islam with you. So your responsibility is to visit them, to ask about them, to maintain good ethics with them. You visit their dead, you visit their sick, you watch funerals of their dead. There's responsibilities towards you even. So this is the you have with the other people. Because what's happening now, especially in this day and age, is these bubbles that are being created, we're becoming more radicalized in our own opinions. We reject the other person just because of difference of opinion. We work together on a certain cause. As soon as there's a difference of opinion, we part. We don't know how to live with one another. And this radicalization of thought is a big problem. We shouldn't have it. We have to understand and learn how to live with one another, even though there are differences in our thoughts and opinions. We have to learn how to compromise, how to reach middle ground, how to understand how to deal with other people, and remove this radicalization where we reject anybody who doesn't hear our opinion. We have to be more compassionate, more loving, more forgiving. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was to deal with us how we deal with people, all of us are going to go to hell. Nobody wants God to deal with them the way they deal with other people. We want God to forgive us for every mistake we do, but when it comes to people's mistakes, we're very hard when it comes to forgiving. Like, no, I can't forgive this individual. That mistake is too big. Or if I forgive them, they're going to continue doing this wrong thing. We become this judge, this moral judge, and we think that we're more wise than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. If God is the most wise judge, and he adopted this method of forgiving excessively, then we have to adopt that model and not try to come to our own model, which is this radical understanding or behavior when it comes to dealing with the other. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Qul huwa Allahu ahad, Allahu samad, lam yalid wa lam yulad wa lam yakun lahu kufuwan ahad. أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Praise belongs to God, the first without a first before him, the last without a last behind him. Beholders' as eyes fall short of seeing him. Describers' as imaginations are not able to depict him. He originated the creatures through his power with an origination. He devised them in accordance with his will, with a devising. Then he made them walk on the path of his desire. He sent them out on the way of his love. They cannot keep back from that to which he has sent them forward, nor can they go forward to that from which he has kept them back. I bear witness that there is no God but God, alone with no partner. And I bear witness that Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi is his servant and messenger. O God, send your blessings upon Muhammad, the seal of the prophets and the master of the messengers. And send your blessings, O Lord, upon Ali, the commander of the faithful, and upon Fatima Zahra, the lady of the women of the worlds, and upon Hassan and Al-Hussein, the masters of the youth of paradise. O God, send your blessings upon the imams of the Muslims, Ali ibn al-Hussein, and Muhammad ibn Ali, wa Ja'far ibn Muhammad, and Musa ibn Ja'far, Ali ibn Musa, Muhammad ibn Ali, Ali ibn Muhammad, Hassan ibn Ali, and the awaited Hujjah al-Mahdi. May Allah hasten his reappearance, ease his emergence, and make us among his supporters and followers. I took a bit extra more time than I wanted to in the first sermon, so I'm going to have to summarize this one, inshallah, in order to be respectful of your time. What I want to talk about is dua of Friday. Now, my intention was to present a long commentary on it, but because the time is short, I'm going to summarize, inshallah. When we look at the du'as of the imams, the supplications that they taught us, the supplications were not only things that they taught us to recite in the masjid or in our homes in order to ask for something from God or to complain about something. The supplications that the imams gave us can be categorized into different categories. There are supplications that are long, like dua qumil, right? On Thursday night, you come, you spend about supplication. There are other supplications that are short, like the supplications of the days of the week. And there are even shorter supplications. If we look at the Quran, pray to God in one sentence. They didn't even have introductions to it. They didn't have like a long explanation. Like, رَبِّ لَا تَذَرْنِي فَرْدًا وَأَنْتَ خَيْرُ الْوَارِثِينَ. Oh Allah, do not leave me alone without children, and you're the best of inheritors. A prophet praying to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant him a child. Very short supplication. There's no Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. There's no salawat. There's no praising of God. It's a very short sentence. So we understand from this that supplications play a different role according to what we're trying to achieve from them. Someone who's drowning in the water is not going to try to remember the dua from Mafatih al-Jinan or dua qumil or something and start reciting that for God to save him, right? If you're drowning, you're going to say, oh Allah, get me out of here, right? It's going to be like very improvised dua, on the spot, coming from the bottom of your heart. That serves a certain function. And in reality, that kind of dua is usually the most sincere prayer. It's like when you're in a very bad situation, it comes from your heart. You're suffering in your life. You're having a difficult time. A lot of us who are students, you know, we became very religious before the final week, right? When it came to finals, start sending questions to the Sheikh. Can you send me a dua to pass this exam? And when you're doing the exam, you're doing all the basmalas, right? Bismillah ar-Rahman al-Fatiha, Ayatul Kursi, anything you memorize in Sunday school, all comes out from the bottom of your heart because you want to pass that exam, right? So most of the time, when we're in that kind of like dire situation, we are able to pray from our hearts. But usually those kinds of prayers are related to our desires. It's something that we want. And God had allowed this. And out of his mercy and forgiveness, he grants us those prayers, even though it comes from a selfish point of view, right? But Allah is a very forgiving God, a very merciful, a very compassionate God. Even things that sometimes are very selfish inside of us, he grants it to us, as long as it doesn't give us a lot of harm. It doesn't cause us a lot of harm. Another or a higher level of dua are those prayers that the imams have taught us. So we have the imam being an individual who's elevated spiritually, right? The imam doesn't have the ego. When he's talking to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he's beyond himself. He's transcended himself. So he becomes the master of spirituality. And in order for him to be, or because he is a master, he has an obligation or duty to teach the students how to become better. If you go to university or you go to school, that's what your teacher's responsibility is in class, right? They're supposed to elevate you on the intellectual level, make you smarter individuals. And if they're true teachers, they care about your ethics and your morals and your behavior as well. So because they've reached that higher level and children begin without these teachings, the teacher's responsibility in society is to elevate those individuals and teach them and prepare them to become better human beings because of the experience that the teacher has in their life, right? They're on a higher level. The imams being superior to us spiritually, they are like those teachers. We are like those children. We're still not very aware spiritually of what's best for us. We're not aware of what decisions are best for us, what paths to take in life. We usually behave based on our egos and the limited information that we have. So the imam's duty as a guide is to elevate us, is to teach us how to speak to God, how to contemplate about God, what path to take in life. Their role is that teaching role. One of the methods that they use are the supplications that we have. Like last night we had the supplication of Dua of Kumail, which is a very, very beautiful supplication. The imams begin by teaching us who God is. So if you're asking God for something, why do you have to begin with praising God? In different types of praises, like what I recited at the beginning of the sermon and the other sermon, these are taken from the supplications and the sermons of the imams, alayhimus salam. This type of description, and you can see that each one is different than the other. So why do the imams do this? Well, it's to create a higher consciousness within ourselves. If you're talking to a child and you're going to visit someone very important, you have to prepare them for it, right? Especially if you have a child that you can't control very well. You have to tell them, look, we're going to a very important person. It's a very respectful place. We have to stay quiet. We have to do this. We have to do that. And by instilling these ideas in the child's mind, their imagination begins to play. They start imagining what you're telling them. That this is a place like this, a place like that. They alter their behavior based on that type of language that you use with them. So before entering that sacred conversation with God, the imam teaches us that you have to, first of all, fix your imagination. You came from work, you're busy with your kids, you've been watching like clips on your phone or your TV, or you're listening to the radio. If you still do that, some people still do that. If you listen to the radio and you want to enter that conversation with God, but you have all of this stuff playing in your head. So the imam creates that barrier. With his language, he throws those things to the side, and he begins to replace those ideas that you have with a higher level of consciousness. God is the first who had no first before him. He puts you on that level. Now I'm talking to the eternal. I'm supposed to elevate myself from this world over here that's filled with limitations and space and time, and everything here is restricted. Now I'm getting into a conversation with the eternal. I'm going outside of time and outside of space. So this is just one example. When you look at du'as, this is the approach, this is how it be. Why did they praise them this way? And what are the words that they use? The imams are not just trying to fill the page with poetry and language, right? Everything they write and everything they say has a meaning and a purpose. Our job, our responsibility, just like in school, the teacher teaches you the knowledge, but there's a responsibility upon the student as well. The student has to receive that knowledge, has to review that knowledge, has to study that knowledge. It's not enough just to listen to it, right? If you want to become a scholar, a student, if you want to pass. So the imams give us the dua. It's our responsibilities as the students to look at those du'as and to study them, to contemplate over them, to try to understand them. And once we do, that elevates us, first of all, on the consciousness level, on the intellectual level, and thirdly, when we understand these two, we begin to elevate on the spiritual level as well, because our conversation with God begins to change. Now I'm more aware of who God is. I'm more conscious of who God is. If I don't become conscious of who God is, then when I'm speaking to him, I'm not really speaking to him. I'm not even aware that God exists. A lot of us read the dua, and we have no feeling that we're speaking to God. We're just repeating words and they're just sounds coming out of our mouth, right? So in order to develop that feeling, and I'm not saying that we're responsible to do that for the whole duration of dua qumil. If one of us is able to achieve this feeling or this state for 1 minute in the dua, this is a great blessing. And you want to increase that every single time. A lot of our scholars tell us that you're not expected to read like all of Dua Abi Hamza Thumali, which is pages long, and connect with God on that. You know, with the, or Dua Jawshan, your favorite dua in the month of Ramadan, right? It takes an hour or so to read, right? You're not expected to connect to God for that whole hour. And you're not expected to read all of du'as in their long duration. They tell us that sometimes a segment of dua qumil is what you're connected with, because that's the kind of spiritual state that you're in. If you're someone under a lot of distress, a certain segment of dua qumil you connect with more than the others. That's where you have to focus more. If you're in a feeling of love and ecstasy with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then there are segments in dua qumil that fit for you. They're more focused on the idea of love with Allah. So in that segment, connect with God. And don't feel bad if you don't connect with the others. So start with this small connection and try to understand the du'as, and eventually you realize that your relationship with God improves and grows over time. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us this closeness and proximity to Him, and to allow us to enter this sacred communication with Him with more consciousness and understanding. Walhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen wa sallallahu ala Muhammadin wa ala alihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin.